So hello everyone and welcome to the Cloud Native Bucharest meetup. It's the Christmas edition. So I know that everyone, whether has or had a company party or it's at a kindergarten party. So I appreciate for everyone being here tonight. We have two special guests from Acorn, Shannon Williams and Darren Shepard, who are taking over the way we package and deploy applications on top of Kubernetes. I know there are some interesting ways to do it, and people usually use Helm. But already, even though for some people Helm might be new, I think there are always better ways to do that. So I'm gonna leave the mic to Shannon to give us an introduction. And yeah, we look forward for the presentation.
Thanks, Andre. And thanks, Bogdan. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's wonderful to talk to you all from California. I'm very excited to talk to you a little bit about Acorn. I'm here with my co-founder of Acorn, Darren Shepard. Darren and I have been working together for about 14, 15 years now, since we first met. Prior to this, we worked together on an open source project called CloudStack, where Darren was a big part of the community and a user. And then together we founded a company called Rancher before we started Acorn. So we've been working on open source, on containers, on Kubernetes, on cloud computing for a long time. And we're really excited about Acorn and excited to tell you about this project. So today I'll probably go through 4 or 5 slides, just explain the idea and what we're building. We're really just at the very beginning. Acorn is kind of the beginning of what we want to build. And then Darren's going to dive in and demo a little bit and show you how Acorn works. And then we'll happily take any questions you guys have. It's really kind of geared to be pretty hands-on, and we love answering questions. So don't hold back. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's sharing now.
Okay, great. So Acorn is really came about after a lot of experience we had working on Rancher. We worked on Rancher for 8 years, and we worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies and organizations to build out sort of computing environments built on Kubernetes. And it was really about managing clusters, deploying clusters, building K3s environments. We started the K3s project at Rancher and building a lot of management on top of platforms like Amazon, Google, and Azure, EKS. And I think one of the things we found was that while Kubernetes ubiquity had really started to happen over the last years, the adoption of Kubernetes had changed a lot. In the beginning, the biggest challenge was just getting Kubernetes, maintaining a cluster, managing a cluster. Today, we see that most people have that. They have clusters. They're running it, primarily in the cloud. The challenge now seems to have migrated to being really not just about kind of building clusters, but sort of how you build clusters and how those clusters are different from one another. All of the complex different pieces that you incorporate into a cluster, the GitOps and the security and the service meshes and the different approaches people have to, sort of handling the application layer. And then also getting people to use Kubernetes. I think one of the things that we certainly saw, especially in the organizations as they scaled, was that the adoption of Kubernetes was still very much driven by DevOps teams. It was driven by operations, by people that were infrastructure centric, and that developers were using Kubernetes as a back end sometimes, but most developers were kind of indifferent to it, or it's somewhat sort of put off by Kubernetes. And we thought that was kind of odd because, when you think about it, the impetus for Kubernetes came about because of the adoption of Docker, and Docker has grown massively as a platform used by developers. Almost every developer has Docker Desktop or something like it on their machine. People are using Docker every day locally. They still use Docker Compose locally, but Kubernetes hasn't really made that jump. And part of the challenge has been that Kubernetes defining and describing and deploying it still requires a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding of infrastructure, because it really is an infrastructure platform. And that's sort of where we see a lot of organizations at right now as well. When we talk to companies, they're constantly struggling with how to figure out how to make their Kubernetes service work for users. Like, and some companies end up,
Shannon.
trying to build on top of this. One of the things we see is organizations sometimes go with like, oh, everybody gets a cluster. We're going to make lots of clusters available. Others are more constrained. They say, no, everything has to be controlled. We're going to have a PaaS, or we're going to build something like a PaaS. But most of the time, it's lots of templates. It's lots of Helm charts. It's lots of forms that people fill out to sort of define what their app is going to do, and then working with the Kubernetes team to run the application. And when you think about it, it's like, it doesn't feel like we've made a lot of progress. The whole idea of containerization and DevOps was that we were going to make infrastructure more applicable to everybody. People would be able to get their fingers dirty a lot easier. And yet where we end up is, in some ways, things have almost gotten more complicated, right? More environments, more controls, more access privileges, more, unique ways of doing things when you go from one company to the next company, or one team to the next team.
Yeah, are the slides? Are you moving the slides? Like, because everyone's still seeing the first slide, I think.
Yeah, I'm moving the slides. You can't see my slides?
Yeah, I think you shared on the main screen at the presenter.
Hold on. Let me see why. Okay. Share again. Let me see. How about we try it this way? Can you guys see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I was sharing. I was trying to share. Sorry. I was just saying that, we see this broad kind of different approaches people are taking to managing Kubernetes and running Kubernetes. And, that's the spectrum has made it very different when you go from organization to organization. And because of that, I think there's a big learning curve. Just so many developers have kind of chosen not to learn Kubernetes, or to avoid it, and sort of throw their applications over the wall as containers. And so what we've tried to build at Acorn is basically we're targeting building an application management layer for Kubernetes, one that is very developer centric, easy to use, and really focuses on delivering a common application template, and an application template that's really derived from Docker, and starts with something that is going to feel very familiar to a Docker user. And at the same time, we wanted to build something that really gave us a more secure sort of definition of what an application is. And so Acorn is really in its earliest phase. It's an alpha project, and right now we're focused on that Acorn element itself, and that is to build a packaging framework for the application that is very intuitive to understand, very much focused on the local development process, something you can use locally, you can use in the build process, you can push to Kubernetes, and that does a lot of validation, like make sure that things are secure and built in an effective way. And then over time, we're building a lot of the workflows around that. So our goal is to build a project that makes not just the definition of an application, but all of the work around how applications are pushed through the lifecycle, how CI/CD gets done, how application security gets defined and scanned and managed, make all of that sort of flow together in a really nice standard platform that people can consume and use without having to really know Kubernetes on the back end. And that's really where we think the right point is that for all of Kubernetes' strength, it's still more of an infrastructure platform than an application platform. And so we want to build a really lightweight application platform that takes advantage of all that Kubernetes can do and expose that to users. So that's the idea behind Acorn. And what we want to see is, we've built this concept of an Acorn file, which is a very Docker Compose-like way of describing an application. It allows teams to then build an image. Images can be signed, can be managed, can be pushed to registries. But that Acorn image is a multi-container environment. So it's really something very much like a Helm package that gets created for deployment and can be then pushed out to the clusters. But attached to that Acorn image is a full Acorn runtime. So there's a runtime that actually runs on the cluster and can run on the local Docker that you're developing against. So that as a user, you're able to build this sort of complex application structure. You can define variables for, you know, how you want to run it locally, how you want to run it in test, how you want to run it in production, and then, you know, push that same image through the entire life cycle. And then what's happening at the cluster level is this runtime operator is taking those Acorn images and implementing them on top of Kubernetes in a consistent way, so that applications are always deployed the same way, they're always managed the same way, they're always implemented in a way that's secure and isolated and easy for organizations to differentiate from any infrastructure services that are running on the cluster. So the Kubernetes environment is, you know, more standardized. It's more isolated between applications and infrastructure, and easier to then operate and upgrade and maintain and run. So that's really the idea of Acorn, is to start with simplifying the application, and then over time build the experience from, you know, really everything from local dev all the way through till Kubernetes infrastructure kind of begins to disappear. And the places we're seeing people adopt this already is a lot of use on top of platforms like k8s and on top of hosted Kubernetes, where the Kubernetes infrastructure sort of is managed and maintained by the cloud provider. It sort of sits in the background, and the users are just managing, deploying, and pushing Acorns and running them against the cluster. So right now it's still an alpha project. We only released it a couple months ago. This, you know, right now we're really building out a lot of the additional functionality and capabilities around it to, you know, make it production grade for teams. And we should be doing, you know, kind of rolling out the major release for that sometime in the first half of next year. So we're at work on that right now. But I'll turn it over to Darren. Darren, do you want to dive into the demo?
Yep. Let me share my screen and we'll get into demoing this. Let's see. Share. Screen. Share this one. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Everyone's just, yeah. Should be seeing my desktop now. Okay.
Yep. Good.
Let me bring over a console here. And oops. There we go. Like that. Okay, hopefully that's good. All right, so I'm gonna demo Acorn. So actually using Acorn, and I'm gonna be using this little demo app, webhook demo. This is in my I build the cloud webhook demo. I guess there's some way to put that like in the chat or something. Link here. I'll just send a message to everyone. That's a link to the app that I'll be running here. But yeah, so basically, so with Acorn, it's very oriented towards you know, building applications. So it's really good that we have a developer experience, and then basically how do we move from like developing the application to packaging and running that application in the, you know, target production environment. So what I kind of want to demo that flow of kind of what the, you know, kind of how you would develop the application, how you would package it, how you deploy it in a production environment. So everything starts with the Acorn CLI. So the Acorn CLI, super straightforward to get this installed. The easiest thing is just going to be brew for most, you know, Mac users. But there's also, you know, we've got Windows. Where's like the Windows one? Oh, this is going to be installing. Install options. Nope. Sorry. So we've got brew. You can do curl, scoop. It's, you know, we got most, so Windows and Mac and Linux, everything's supported. So it all basically starts with the CLI. So once you've installed the CLI, Acorn basically just runs on top of a Kubernetes cluster. Pretty much any Kubernetes cluster will work. There's like certain requirements. We need an ingress controller, a storage class, some things. So if you just run Acorn install, this will basically go and install Acorn on your cluster, and it tries to validate that you got everything you need. For development, if you're using like Docker Desktop, Rancher Desktop, maybe Minikube, but basically Rancher Desktop and Docker Desktop are those ones just kind of work easily out of the box. Other ones might require like you to install an ingress controller or something. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to get up and running. So you just run Acorn install once you have the CLI. So for a developer, like let's say I want to build my application. So what I'm doing, going back here of this demo, what this is this app, webhooks app. Somebody put together. It's a nice little sample application to develop webhooks. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, basically be developing this application. And so I have this repo here just cloned down locally. So this is the repo. And so if you look at this, the main thing for your application is going to be an Acorn file. And I'm going to go over this in just a second. But basically, this Acorn file, it describes your application. So once you have your Acorn file, describing the application, how to build and run it. To run it in a development mode, it's pretty straightforward. You're just going to say acorn run --dev. Then we can just say current directory. And this is basically, it's going to build the application, and then it's going to bring it up, bring it up on a URL. Let's see. Hopefully this doesn't take too long to build. I tried running it before, so some of the stuff would cache, but might have to do a little changes or whatever. So you can see, so basically the build is done, and now the application's starting. That's what these yellow messages are. It's kind of like status. Things are initializing, coming up. Once it's all good, we'll see a big green message that the app is up and running. So it's pretty close. Okay, so once that's up, we can then click here. And so now we have this running application. So you can see like Acorn makes it super easy of like, we automatically give you a DNS name. You can actually get TLS too. There's Let's Encrypt and stuff. And even the Let's Encrypt works on your laptop too, which is really cool. But I don't have that turned on. When you do Acorn install, basically there's some options here for Let's Encrypt. So if you want to turn on Let's Encrypt, we'll automatically do TLS for you too. But so this gets your application up and running. So it's kind of like the flow of bringing your app up is very similar to like a Docker Compose flow. Like Docker Compose up, it's like here we can just say like Acorn run in a development mode, and you get your app up and running. So the nice thing about when you're running in a development mode is we're doing a couple things. We're running the application kind of in the foreground. We're automatically streaming all the logs from the app, but then also we're then syncing over like dev files and like we're syncing over the source files. So if I go and I go here and I make a change, like in this header here, and I just add some text here, save that, you can see here the sync. It said, it synced over this file. It saw a change. Wait, did it? Or yeah. And then over here, we get, the app change. And usually for a lot of these things, let me see if I can do it. A lot of frameworks are even like super fancy that, like it automatically refreshes, without even you having to like refresh or anything. Because this is all just JavaScript. But you can do the same thing with other compiled languages. Like, so we use like Acorn to develop like Go-based applications, which are compiled, and you can get the same flow of like, you just update the code and it automatically updates and stuff. So you can see like the development flow, it's like from a developer perspective, it's kind of like, well, I get Acorn, I do run, brings up the application, I can change the code, it automatically updates, like everything's great there. It's like, it's a really nice developer experience. Because now let me go and look at like, we'll talk about like what's actually in the Acorn file here. Is in the Acorn file, you can see, start here with containers. So this defines like all the kind of the containers that are going to run. So we have multiple components here. So we have like the API server. This is a WebSocket server. We're actually running Mongo here. We're running Nats. This is the Swagger API, like that's this docs thing. And then here's some static content. And then also we have an HTTP router here. So it's like if requests come in on /, we go to this service, docs goes to this service, this goes, so this is actually a fairly complicated application, and it's all packaged up, really nice and easy. So it's like, so far what I've shown you is kind of like, this is a really nice, very similar to a Docker Compose like flow of developing the application, which, hopefully should feel very similar, like very comfortable to a lot of people. So the next thing is, so now that I've developed this application, like how do I move forward of running this in production on Kubernetes? Okay, so that's where this is where Acorn gets really kind of interesting, and this is kind of where it's going to differentiate from most other developer-oriented frameworks. Is basically now that I've kind of developed my application, I can just go. Let's go to the command line here and go to. Sorry, I'm in webhook demo. Okay, so I have my app here. So what I can do is I can now just build the application, but I'm going to tag it. Very similar user experience of building a Docker image, but instead we're going to build an Acorn image, which is the full application. So here, I'm going to tag it. I'm going to push this Docker Hub, and I'll push it to my own account. And we'll just put ASDF. Doesn't matter. So we're going to go and build this application. And tag it. It's rebuilding, the image because I made that the little header change or whatever. Okay, so now basically if I say like Acorn images, I've now built this image. So what this image is if I go back to my Acorn file here, there's multiple parts of this. It's like here we're building the API component. So this is being built from a Docker file. Here we're actually Mongo, we're just referencing an image. So it's just an existing Docker image. When we build the application image, we pull all of that together into like one image. Let me see if I, so it's like this one app image I have here. What you can do is if I say containers, I think if I give it image ID here, this will tell you it's like this application image here actually contains all of these container images. Like we've packaged the entire application together into one thing. So now your whole app is just like one thing. It's like one, you can sign it, you can push it around. So it's like, so I have this app now, and now I can say Acorn push, and I'm just going to push this out. And so this is going to, push it to, a repo somewhere. So here, so this is going to push it out to, my Docker Hub. My internet might die while it's doing the push. Just give it a second here. I should have done this once before, so it was a little faster. Almost there. Almost there. Okay, so once this is pushed, now I built my application. Now I just need to go and run it anywhere. So all I have to do is just basically say like Acorn run, and I can point it to if I change like my kube config. So my kube config here, Darren, well, I mean this doesn't really matter. So just like I have another shared dev environment that I'm running against. So if I do that, then basically this is going to run this application on this other cluster. So it's like the Acorn CLI, I can just point it to anywhere that has Acorn installed and run it there. So I'm still just going to run it locally, but here I'm just going to call this like, sample app. So here, now I've gone and, I packaged up the application, and now you can imagine I'm running this on like the production system. So like, give this a second, it will come up. So yeah, so like now I have this app running, on what would be theoretically my production system. So now if I go and I make another change to the application, so let me, I'll just change this to ASDF 3 that. Then I go through the same thing of like, oops. Okay. I'm going to go through and I'm going to build it again. So now I'll build it with the new tag ASDF2. Okay, so I build this new application, blah blah blah, or like build this version. Okay. And then basically push this thing out there. This should go faster because the vast majority of the content should be cached, right? Yeah. So this goes much faster because the majority of the content was already out there since I had already pushed it. And now, so now once I have like a new version of my application, I can just go to this sample app and just say, okay, Acorn update image. Now I want it to be running ASDF2. And I'm going to update the sample app. Okay, and then when I run that, you can see, okay, this is going and updating. Like if I look at the containers that are running and say Acorn containers, and see like, oh, shoot, everything already updated by the time I got to that. But now when I click on this application, now it's running like the new change that I just did. So all of that, so it's like, basically what I'm showing here is like development is like as easy as Docker Compose. You can package up your application and then you can very easily push it and update it. Everything I did was kind of CLI driven, but you can also do all of this, with a GitOps type flow. So like when I say run this sample app, if I just basically push -o YAML here, if I do -o YAML, it's gonna basically output the the YAML, and I can put this into a GitOps system, and then I can do my updates to the application through just changing the tag here. So it's like the CLI is this really nice user experience, but under the hood, Acorn is actually like still just a full Kubernetes API and everything. So it plugs really nice into the whole Kubernetes ecosystem too. But yeah, so that's kind of the end-to-end flow of kind of using Acorn, what it looks like. I think at this point, I'll throw it back to Shannon, or we'll do questions. We want to do Shannon.
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions. Did anybody have any questions they wanted to ask? I mean, there was one that Andre asked in the chat that said, "Are the Acorn images bigger in size than a regular Docker image?"
Oh yeah, so this is like we always get this question, and I really put this slide kind of describing how this works. Is Docker images under the hood, as a lot of people know, is like it's all of these layers. So it's like it's binary assets that are stored in a Docker image repo, like a registry, and then there's references to them. So a Docker image is really just like a JSON document, which then refers to all this binary content. So when we create the application, the Acorn image, it's the same, like it's really just a JSON file and then point to all the existing content. So that's why, like when I built the second app and I pushed it, it didn't like push more content because all the content was already pushed up there. So so basically it's like if you're pushing to the same registry from where you pulled from, it's using all the same content. Like we didn't modify the images or anything. So it's like we don't actually like take all the Docker images and like package them up into a big tarball or something. It's just making references to all the other Docker images. So it's going to be the same size. There's some little bugs right now, I guess, in Acorn. Like when you do a push, it's going to appear that we're pushing more content than we really are. But trust me, under the hood, it's all using like the existing digests that already, and the blobs in the registry that already exist.
Any other questions? Yeah. When Andre said, what happens if you pull an Acorn image and try to run it with Docker run?
Oh, not much. Like nothing will really happen, because what happened, like watch, it's just going to get confused. It'll try to pull it, and then it'll say no command is specified. And then if you basically, because I'm going to see if I can do this. Create name. Boo, no command specified. There's a way to, oh wait. So if I pull the image, I'm trying to see if I can Docker pull, and then Docker state. No, I think it's export. Let me save. TV app. Okay, so basically you can see it creates this one Docker. So what ends up happening, this is a real roundabout way of showing this or whatever it is the Docker will only end up pulling the manifest layer, which describes like the application itself. So it's, anyways, yeah, it's all it really sees is this content, car TV. This is the Acorn metadata, because it's the way it's structured. If you want to get into like the kind of the low level technical details, how it works is like basically the Acorn image at the very top is an OCI index. Index is an OCI index, which then points to a series of other OCI indexes, and those OCI indexes are the actual Docker images. So it's 2 layers of indexes. It's using nested indexes, and so Docker, because it's like Docker doesn't know how to handle that. So
yeah, it makes sense. So basically, if I would like to summarize like a comparison with Helm, it's like Acorn packages the container, the actual container, and like the manifest, compared to Helm, where it's only the manifest. You describe how the application will be run. Now you have the application as well.
Yeah. So it's fundamentally like, so from the, if you want to get the technical details of what's different between an Helm package and an Acorn package, like you're right. Like the main thing that's different is we're packaging all the container images with it. But it's like, it's not kind of really fair to put Acorn and Helm at the same level, because Helm is kind of like, it's the thing that does anything. You can package anything for Kubernetes. Acorn is very, very much optimized towards application and application development. So it's like, it's not oriented towards deploying like Kubernetes infrastructure services and stuff. Like you're not going to deploy your CNI driver using Acorn. Like that doesn't really make sense. Like, so we're very oriented towards applications. So this is, a framework for packaging applications, whereas Helm can package applications, but it also packages a lot of other kind of system level services and drivers and all this other stuff.
Does it work with CRDs or operators with Kubernetes, or do you plan to make it work?
Right. So we're working on kind of that integration of like, what is like, how do CRDs integrate with Acorn? So we're working on a pretty like the use case we want to address is like, I have an operator and that operator like supplies a database. So how can I deploy an application and get like a service from an operator so that I can use it? And so we're kind of building a framework around that and so it's heavily based around the way operators work and CRDs work. And so it's like, we're not looking to like, hey, let's just add CRD support, because that's a lot of like Kubernetes concepts just bleeding through into Acorn. And what does it really matter for the application or application developer? But where CRDs and operators make sense is a lot of times in how do I consume services. So that's where we're focused at the moment, is building integration into the kind of the whole operator ecosystem and CRDs for binding, consuming, managing services.
All right, that's nice. I think Bogdan has a question as well. So what happens in the cluster at runtime with the regular Kubernetes objects like pods and services and?
Right. Yeah. So we can dig into. So if you look at like what's actually running in the cluster for Acorn, let's just look at the Acorn system namespace. So the main things that are running is So we basically we have Acorn itself we have a custom API server. So this is like using Kubernetes API aggregation. Then we have a controller, and then we run an embedded builder and registry. This is only needed for development. You wouldn't have this in a production setup because you're not building images locally in your production clusters. So the controller is the main thing, because this is also like a big difference between Helm and Acorn, is like how this is accomplished. Is when I was showing you before, like the contents of that Acorn image, is we package like the Acorn file and the metadata in the image. So it's not until at runtime does it get turned into Kubernetes resources. So the Kubernetes resources, so it's like that's done at runtime, and the reason why it's done that way, like it's not like Helm, where like Helm just basically spits out a bunch of YAML, right? Acorn at runtime, it generates the YAML, effectively the YAML, and deploys it. And the reason for that is basically we can make the best decision for what should be done for that cluster at that time, because there's a lot of different infrastructure choices, like networking, storage, certificates, TLS, stuff like that. There's a lot of different choices that are made that the Acorn runtime or the Kubernetes cluster admin can configure in certain ways. So the resources will dynamically be generated differently. Also, there's other things of like, how do you support Kubernetes, 121, 122, 123. So Acorn basically compensates for all of that in abstracting you away from the Kubernetes resources, because you just define your application as the high-level Acorn file, and then we generate the resources on the fly. So if there's a new version of Kubernetes, you don't have to change your application. Acorn, as long as Acorn supports the new version of Kubernetes, then your app will work on that new version of Kubernetes. Yeah, and so the objects that we actually deploy, so how this works under the hood is when we deploy an app, like I created this sample app. So there's actually a CRD in here called sample app. I can look at the YAML, the spec or whatever. It's pretty straightforward. Like there's a lot more arguments you can do, but this is the kind of like the very simple. So there's basically kind of like one CRD that you're doing to deploy the app. But when you deploy that application, every app gets a brand new namespace. So you can see like the CRD is created in the Acorn namespace, but this will create a namespace here, sample app. And then if I go into this namespace and I start looking at things like deployments, we create pretty much just standard Kubernetes objects. They're very like normal. It's not a lot of new concepts. We're just building off the basic primitives in Kubernetes. So it's not like kind of like Knative, which has like all these new concepts and components. At runtime, this is pretty much just like deployment, services, ingress, secrets. It's all the standard things. And they're also deployed with like the same friendly names that are in the Acorn file. So you can see like we've created all these deployments. If you look at like secrets, we've created the secret. I guess there's no secrets except full secrets. But you also see like here's all the services that we create, all the ingress objects, and all the other things, PVs, PVCs, like whatever you need. So that's all the stuff that we're kind of generating under the hood.
All right. Another question, like managing outside dependencies, outside of the cluster dependencies, like using crossplane to refer to S3 or RTS or whatever cloud native solutions out there.
Well, yeah. So the idea is, I guess I can answer this way of like when you're deploying your application, for example, in this Acorn file, we can see we have Mongo here, right? So in this application, I've embedded Mongo. Like that's not a production application. Like you're not going to just run a container for Mongo. It doesn't really make any sense, right? So things like that is like when I deploy this application, what I would really want to do is at runtime, when I run this application, we have this concept of linking. So basically at runtime, you can bind in things to your application. Like, so you can link in services, you can bind in secrets, you can change like, whatever environment variables, but like you can set up how the ports are published and stuff like that. So at deployment time, there's a lot of different configuration. So what I can do is instead of running, I say help here. Oops. Oh no, sorry. Images. I go and describe this application. So if I say run this ASTF dash. Okay, so this tells me this app or whatever, it has these services. So there's this one here for Mongo. What I can do is I can say Acorn run link some other Mongo. So it's like, or we'll just call it, it's like external Mongo. Okay, so external Mongo, and we want to link that to Mongo, and then we go and we run, we run the application. So what that's going to do is it's going to link in the external Mongo service. So what is the external Mongo service? Under the hood, that's really just a Kubernetes service. So there's a lot of different ways to describe a Kubernetes. So it's like you could actually deploy another Acorn, which then exposes that service. Or you can just create a Kubernetes service, like a cluster IP or even an external name. So if you do an external name, then basically we'll bind that into the application. So this is one of the ways that you can, kind of override, kind of the internal service discovery, and you can link in things. There's also, let me see if I have an example in here. Okay, so there's tests. Other ways of doing this is I can say something like this, like the database host. Okay, database host, and we're going to say like Mongo URL. I don't know. We'll make something up. So in here, actually we'll put it empty. I'll show you. So like these are different techniques and stuff you can do. So what you can do is you can say here, like if args.mongo URL is empty, then basically we're going to run the embedded one. But if it's not empty, then we're just basically we'll use that, and then let's say whoever uses Mongo, let's say this guy uses Mongo. Mongo URL, something like this. We'll point this to the, Mongo URL, something like that. Okay. So then what we can do is when we build this application, I don't actually have to build it. I could just say help. This now gives me an argument to my application of like, what's the Mongo URL? All right. So when I run this, I can just say, okay, Mongo URL, equals something like that. And if I go and I look at this new app round do that was deployed, let me see, and I look at containers of that application, you can see like it's not launching Mongo. But anyway, so there's like a lot of flexibility and stuff you can do. So there's kind of, the way we look at Acorn is there's kind of three levels of things. There's the Acorn image itself, which is like supposed to be the application definition. It's very high level. It's very portable. It kind of works anywhere. Then when you go and you run the Acorn application, you can then bind in environment-specific information, secrets, services, environment variables, volumes. That's all runtime-specific information. Then the next level down is when you install Acorn, the runtime itself, like there's configuration of the Acorn and the Kubernetes environment to then tweak the infrastructure. Like you want specific storage, networking, monitoring, whatever, service mesh integration. So there's like kind of different layers to, how apps are configured and managed, and kind of corresponds to different roles. Because like the Acorn runtime is going to be managed by the Acorn more of a Kubernetes operator, whereas the application developer is just building the Acorns and pushing them. Yeah, I don't know. That was probably a long-winded answer, and I don't know if I answered the question directly.
Yeah, it's nice to see that you can create very complex scenarios of like linking external services, and definitely there are use cases. It's not very clear for me. Do you need to run Kubernetes locally in order to run a dev environment, basically to run to run your dev environment, to deploy
yeah.
using Acorn on your own PC?
So Acorn fundamentally runs on a Kubernetes cluster. Whether or not that cluster is locally on your laptop or it's shared somewhere else, like it's remote, it all works the same. So I can do like whatever the dev flow that I'm showing here. This works on a fully remote cluster. But it's like, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, Acorn needs a Kubernetes cluster, whether it's local or remote. And then there's a whole you can choose, like, you can do kind of project, like team collaborations and permissions and stuff all around, like just Kubernetes RBAC and different namespaces. So if you you can set up a shared development cluster and then just give teams access to different namespaces, and then they can run their apps in those different namespaces just using standard RBAC.
All right, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
I have one more question. Don't want to overtake the Q&A session, but I'm very curious about Acorn and I really like the project. I was curious about like being an open source project, how one can contribute to the open source project. What are the main areas that you are interested in someone to cover or looking for contributors?
Well, I mean, everything for the Acorn is just basically you're going to find it acorn.io/Acorn. So this is the main project. Everything is in here. Ooh, license complaints. So if you want to collaborate, it's kind of, this is the main repo, this is the issues, whatever. The biggest thing for us is really like just getting user feedback right now of like, we just want people using it and trying it. Like, can you package your application? Even if, like, because this is an alpha project, it's really new. We know there's, going to be issues or whatever. So like the biggest thing is we just really want people to try it out and see, like, kind of, does it work for your use case? Like, does, are there issues with it? Do you like it? Yeah. Like, so that's the biggest thing that we're looking for, is really just feedback on how the project works. And then we have a Slack. How do we find the Slack? Is it from, I think if you just go to acorn.io, there should be a link to the Slack too. And so you can go and talk in there or whatever. Yeah.
All right. That's fabulous. Yeah, I'm done with the questions. If anyone has some questions, you can take over the mic or share your questions in the chat room.
Yeah, I'm curious about the runtime. So, assuming you have an Acorn packaged application running on a production cluster, what type of typical operations you do with the Acorn CLI that would make your life easier, that are right now kind of tedious to do with without Acorn, excluding, of course, installing and upgrading the application, which I guess it's obvious. Okay.
Well, I mean, so the thing is like the fundamental things about Acorn is like, it's really just being able to describe and package your application in a way that does not require like intimate Kubernetes knowledge. So it's like kind of like what it really enables you to do is, like, let's say the operations team, because typically what we see today is you have like the Kubernetes like operations teams or whatever, they have to set up kind of like how apps are going to be deployed on the cluster and come up with some framework, pipeline, PaaS abstraction or something like that of how to actually deploy applications. And then as they, onboard 10 apps or 1,000 apps, it's kind of like, how does that scale up? How do they deal with all this, different applications and stuff? And so it's like really what Acorn's really kind of enabling you to do is provide this very nice abstraction that you can really hand much more over to the development side and say, okay, this is the framework that you use to package your applications. And then from kind of the operations side, it's a well-known concrete unit. You can kind of trust its contents. It's not, because like today, if you get a Helm chart, like from an ops side, you can't just take any Helm chart and just run it. You just really don't know what's in it. And so like the mechanism most companies do today, because a lot of people are using Helm charts, is you kind of have blessed Helm templates. So it's like everything's based on that template, which is still like putting a certain level of trust that they didn't change that template too much or whatever. And so the idea of Acorn is like you can build a lot more rigor around the package that's coming from the application side. And then also, if you know all your applications are Acorn, then the operations of the Kubernetes cluster becomes drastically simpler because there's a lot of consistency. You know exactly how everyone's doing ingress, storage, networking. Like there's only certain things that can be changing. And you as an admin are making a lot of the decisions of the lower level stack of like the, networking, storage, stuff like that. Whereas the app developer is really just defining their application. So as I was saying, like that's why like one of the fundamental things about Acorn is we don't generate or render the Kubernetes YAML until runtime because we want that to be optimized for the environment. And so we're building a lot of the flexibility from the admin side to kind of tweak what that looks like. So yeah, that's kind of like the main thing, because it's like, yeah, it's like Kubernetes is this amazing platform. The kind of the downfall from the application side is that like you're giving something way too powerful to the application end user. And so Acorn is creating this abstraction that we really feel does not limit the capabilities of Kubernetes. It's just presenting it in a way that has like more control and rigor and very optimized towards applications, how applications are packaged and stuff. So, yeah.
All right. So I would assume the typical operations one might do are still I'll still run the regular way, like investigating diagnosing some cluster problems. It will not be changing much.
No, because
using the same objects and.
Yeah. So in terms of like if you're looking at like troubleshooting, that type of stuff, it doesn't really change a heck of a lot. I mean, you have a lot more consistency around the application, so you'll have a little better idea of like this component is failing and it's from this app. But you can kind of figure that already out with Helm and everything. So it's like it doesn't fundamentally change things, and that's somewhat by design. It's like we're not necessarily trying to change, like it's like we're building Acorn on top of Kubernetes because we already know Kubernetes is good. People understand Kubernetes. It's everywhere. It's like, so I don't want to really change, how the ops deals with all that stuff. How are you doing logging and monitoring and, security plugins and all that stuff? It's like, no, most of that pretty much stays the same. It's Kubernetes. And Acorn just sits at a higher level. So, yeah.
Very clear. And inside the apps, something like, I don't know, autoscaler setup, like how many pods I should run, stuff like that. It would be, I guess, the decision process would be identical to your typical deployment.
Yeah. So so like, for example, like auto scaling is an interesting one of like, right now, Acorn does not have native auto scaling capabilities. We will add like at some point native kind of horizontal auto scaling capabilities into Acorn such that the, Acorn can describe the scaling requirements of that application. But today we don't have that. But this is like the nice thing about Acorn is that because it's still just Kubernetes under the hood and it's pretty much standard Kubernetes, it integrates fairly well with the whole rest of the ecosystem, such that you can have an application and you can deploy it. And then from an admin side, you can create an HPA and that HPA can manage an Acorn deployment. It's just as long, like the only requirement is Acorn, you have to basically set no replicas. So if you set no replicas, then we don't manage the number of replicas, and then the HPA will manage the number of replicas. And so like there's other examples, like things like Flagger, like, you know, one day, yeah, it'd be great if we have progressive delivery built into Acorn. It's not there right now, but you can pick up Flagger. Flagger still will work with Acorn. You know, so it's like we still have this whole ecosystem. A lot of people ask like, well, like what's like the plugin model? Like how do I plug into Acorn and stuff like that? And it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's Kubernetes. So the plugin model is largely leverage the Kubernetes way. You know, you can do mutating webhooks. You can do, you know, CRD, you can write your own controllers. You can, you know, leverage existing frameworks like, you know, OPA or, you know, other things, you know, so it all just kind of fits in.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Any
All right,
questions?
guys.
That went a lot longer than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm glad there were lots of questions and lots of interest. Anything we can show you? Otherwise, thank you so much for having us. This was fantastic. We really enjoyed talking to everyone.
I think there was a question about secrets. I know there was on one slide a mention of secrets, but is there something particularly special about handling secrets in Acorn?
Yeah. So there's quite a bit in Acorn around secrets. Let me see if I can find more of an example that has secrets. Oh, wait. And then let's see if this one has secrets in it. Yeah, okay. So what we do is like you can reference in Acorn, you can reference secrets. And then by default, like we have different types of secrets, and we will generate those secrets if you don't have one. So like for something like a for a lot of times like a token, or there's another one, like let's say user, you can say this is called basic. And what this will basically do is it will generate a username. Well, you can set the username, you know, root, something like that. But it will generate a password for you. So it's like by default, it's like we want you to be using secure secrets. So if you don't specify a secret, we have mechanisms that at runtime it will automatically generate secrets for you. And you can get very powerful with the secrets. We have this one called like a template secret where you can like, I don't know, you can kind of build arbitrary data by referencing things. So so here it's like, so I have this secret DB pass, and which is just a generated token. I can then refer to that secret and like pass it in as like the environment variable, or you can do things like pass it in as a file. You can say like run secrets, you know, foo, and then you can reference that secret. It will then inject that secret in. But so you know, so we're doing secrets there, and then at runtime, when you deploy your application, there's secrets. You can then bind in secrets, and so under the hood, it's still just Kubernetes secrets. So if in my application, like I had a secret in there called it was like DB pass. That was a secret. So if I have a secret in here, like, so I can just say, you know, secret, you know, existing secret, just bind that in, and then it will use that secret instead. So, and then the way that you manage that secret is like very flexible because it is just a Kubernetes secret. So, you know, if you want to use Vault or external secrets, or, you know, like Flux with SOPs, you know, whatever to get that secret in there, then you can do that. You just bind it into the application. On top of that, for secrets is like we can, when you run an application, you can set arbitrary like annotations. You can set annotations, and you can annotate or label any resource. And so like for secrets, like if you're doing like the Vault operator, like that will integrate. All you have to do is like when you run your application, you just say, I would forget this syntax. Oops. There's help in here. Oh yeah, it's like here. So you can just say like, okay, well, label the all containers with this one, or you can say like, I took this and I can say label containers foo with this key and value. So you can put labels and annotations on any arbitrary objects that are running, and then that will integrate with like, you know, vaults or operators and stuff like that. So yeah, so like the secrets, it's pretty darn flexible. Oh yeah, and then on top of it, we also do native secrets encryption. So every Acorn environment has a public-private key associated with it. Like you can manage this yourself, or like just by default, it will generate a public key. So then what you can do is you can say like Acorn secret encrypt, and you can pass in the public key, like, because you can encrypt this for a lot of clusters or just for the local one. So you say like public key for this local one. This is the default behavior. If I just say encrypt, and then so putting your data to encrypt, and then basically it's going to spit that out. And so I can just put this. I can put this just directly into the Kubernetes secret. And then I don't have to worry about, you know, tacking on SOPs and all other type of encryption things. But if you have a way to encrypt secrets, you can do that already. But we natively have like our own encryption thing, and it's all based off of libsodium, like that stuff. Yeah.
All right. I think that was the last question we had. So yeah, thank you so much for the answers.
Yeah, that's fun.
Thanks for having us.
Great out.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, everyone, have a great Christmas. Enjoy, hopefully, a bit of good weather. And if you have any other questions, just reach out to us on Slack. We're on slack.acorn.io. You can find Darren on there, or me on there, or anywhere else.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.